2 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, and the galaxy looked completely different. Commander Jake Morrison was now Admiral Morrison, and he stood on the bridge of the EDF Liberty, which was the first Dreadnought-class vessel humanity had ever built. The ship was 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to reduce a planet to rubble. It also carried advanced medical facilities, research laboratories, and diplomatic quarters because humanity had learned that true power was about more than just weapons. Captain Linda. Hayes stood beside him reviewing defensive positions around New Earth, which was now the largest human colony outside the solar system. The Liberty was part of a fleet that protected Coalition space. 37 species had joined the Coalition now, and more applications came in every month. The Coalition controlled about a third of known space, and that territory was growing. Trade was booming. Technology was advancing faster than ever because species were sharing knowledge freely instead of hoarding it. Crime was down because the Coalition actually enforced laws instead of debating them. It was not perfect, but it was better than what came before. The Galactic Council still existed, but only barely. About 20 species remained as members, and most of those were talking about leaving. The Council had no real power anymore. They could not enforce trade regulations because most trade happened outside their jurisdiction. They could not authorize military action because they had no military worth mentioning. They could not even maintain their own infrastructure because they had relied on human engineers for too long. Zenith Prime Station was falling apart. Systems failed regularly. Several sections had been sealed off because life support was not working. Speaker Vorth was still in charge, but he was a broken man. He gave speeches to empty chambers about the glory of tradition and the importance of proper procedure, but nobody was listening. The Quellans, who had been one of the founding species, were having internal debates about whether to abandon the Council and join the Coalition. The Paxians had already submitted an application after their economy collapsed so badly they had no other choice. Even species that had been Council members for thousands of years were questioning whether the old system made any sense. The Vrexian Empire no longer existed as a major power. After the trial, war leader Krath had been sentenced to life in prison for crimes against humanity. The Vrexian government had broken into 3 separate factions that spent more time fighting each other than anyone else. Several former Vrexian colonies had joined the Coalition and were thriving under the protection of human ships. The species that had once terrorized half the galaxy was now just another struggling civilization trying to figure out how to survive in a new era. Ambassador Claire Bennett had become Secretary of State, and she spent most of her time on Unity Station, coordinating Coalition diplomacy. The station had grown into a massive facility that made Zenith Prime look like an outdated relic. Hundreds of ships docked there every day. Thousands of diplomats and traders and scientists worked in its towers. The station had become the new center of galactic civilization, and everyone knew it. Claire addressed the Coalition Assembly, which was in session to discuss expansion into new territories. The assembly chamber was designed to accommodate every kind of biology imaginable. Some delegates sat in chairs, some floated in tanks, some stood on pedestals, and some existed as pure energy contained in force fields. But they all had equal votes and equal voices. Claire spoke clearly. We have received applications from 5 new species this month. All of them meet our standards for membership. All of them have agreed to our charter. I recommend we accept them. There were no objections. The vote was unanimous. In the old council, these applications would have taken years to process and might have been rejected for political reasons. In the Coalition, it took 15 minutes. President Henry Walsh was serving his 2nd term and had become one of the most respected leaders in the galaxy. He met regularly with Coalition members and maintained careful relations with non-aligned species. He had even opened limited communication with what remained of the Council because he believed in keeping diplomatic channels open. But he made it clear that humanity would never rejoin. That ship had sailed 2 years ago, and it was never coming back. Walsh sat in his office on Earth looking at reports from across Coalition space. General Patricia Cole was with him reviewing military readiness. The general had been promoted to Supreme Commander of Coalition Defense Forces, which was a position that coordinated the militaries of 37 different species. It was a complicated job, but Cole was good at complicated jobs. She pulled up a tactical map. We have 300 ships on active patrol, another 500 in reserve. Our new weapon systems are performing above expectations. No hostile force in the galaxy could threaten us even if they tried. Walsh nodded. What about the Vrexian remnants? Cole made a dismissive gesture. They are not a threat anymore. The three factions spend all their time fighting each other. We monitor them to make sure they do not try anything stupid, but mostly we just let them collapse on their own. The bigger concern is some of the Council holdouts. The Quellans are making noises about coalition expansion into territories they claim as traditional zones of influence. Walsh considered this. Traditional zones of influence. That is Council thinking. Everything based on who got there first instead of who is actually living there now. Cole agreed. The colonies in those zones want to join the coalition. They have sent formal requests. The Quellans are trying to block it by claiming ancient treaties give them control. Walsh made his decision. Ancient treaties that were signed before those colonies even existed have no validity. If the people living there want to join the coalition, we will accept them. If the Quellans want to complain, they can file a protest. We will file it in the trash where it belongs. The Secretary of Defense entered the office looking pleased. I just received word from the Talarian government. They have formally withdrawn from the Galactic Council and committed fully to the coalition. That makes 38 members. Walsh smiled. Vex finally convinced his government to make it official. Good for him. He was one of the first to see which way the wind was blowing. In Council space, things continued to deteriorate. Zenith Prime had lost another section when the environmental controls failed. 20 people died before emergency crews could evacuate the area. The Council did not have the resources to repair it properly, so they just sealed it off and hoped the rest of the station would hold together. Trade through Council space had dropped to almost nothing. Most shipping companies now use coalition routes which were faster, safer, and cheaper. The few species that remained loyal to the Council did so either out of stubbornness or because they feared change. Speaker Vorth sat alone in his office looking at reports that all said the same thing. The Council was dying. He could try to deny it, but the numbers did not lie. Revenue was down 90%. Membership was down 70%. Influence was down to almost nothing. The organization he had served his entire life was becoming a footnote in history. He had one last card to play, which was to call for a complete restructuring of the Council, based on coalition principles. Equal representation, merit-based decision-making, actual enforcement of justice instead of endless debate. He proposed this at the next Council session, and to his surprise, several species supported it. Maybe it was not too late. Maybe the Council could reform itself and become relevant again. But the old guard species rejected the proposal. The Quellans insisted that tradition must be maintained. The remaining Paxian representatives argued that change was too risky. They would rather let the Council die than admit they had been wrong. Vorth looked around the chamber at the stubborn fools who were clinging to a sinking ship, and he made a decision. He resigned as Speaker and applied for coalition membership on behalf of his own species. The Quellans were shocked. Their own founding Speaker had abandoned them. Other species followed quickly after. Within a month, the Galactic Council had only 7 members left, and none of them had any real power. The organization that had ruled the galaxy for 5,000 years was effectively dead. History would debate whether it could have been saved or whether it was always doomed to fail. But everyone agreed on one thing. Humanity had been the catalyst that exposed how broken the system really was. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Liberty watching ships from 40 different species conducting joint exercises in coalition space. Human vessels flew alongside Talarian cruisers and Merithian carriers and Drenthian destroyers. They moved in perfect coordination because they had trained together and trusted each other. This was what real cooperation looked like. Not species forced together by ancient treaties, but species choosing to work together because it made everyone stronger. President Walsh gave a speech that was broadcast across coalition space and to anyone else who cared to listen. 3 years ago, humanity stood before the Galactic Council and begged for justice. We were denied. We were dismissed. We were treated as children who did not understand how things worked. So we left. We stopped begging. We stopped asking permission. We built something new based on principles that matter. Equality. From now on, we make our own rules. The war, the economic collapse, started slowly and then accelerated like a ship falling into a black hole. 3 weeks after the human withdrawal, the Paxian government had to request emergency loans from the Council Reserve Fund. Their entire economy had been built on mining operations that humans maintained and shipping routes that humans operated. Without the humans, both systems failed. Unemployment hit 30%. Food shortages began in the outer colonies. The Paxian representative to the council gave a speech begging for help, but nobody wanted to admit they were in the same situation. The Drenthians had it worse. A plague called the Red Death had been killing their people for generations, until human doctors figured out a treatment using nanomedicine. The treatment required regular doses and constant monitoring by specialists who understood human medical technology. When the human doctors left, they took their knowledge and their equipment with them. The Drenthian medical system tried to continue the treatments using what they remembered, but without the proper training, people started dying. Within a month, the death toll was in the thousands and climbing. The Drenthian health minister sent a desperate message to Earth, practically begging for help. President Walsh read the message during a cabinet meeting. They are offering us almost anything we want. Mining rights, technology exchanges, permanent military basing rights. General Cole looked at the offer carefully. It is a good deal. We could use those mining rights. Secretary Palmer nodded in agreement. And it would send a message to the rest of the galaxy that we are reasonable. We punish our enemies but help our friends. Walsh made his decision. Send a medical team but make our terms clear. We are not rejoining the council. We are not submitting to council oversight. We are helping the Drenthians because they need help, and because they are willing to treat us as equals. Any species that wants our aid needs to understand that partnership goes both ways. The medical team arrived on the Drenthian homeworld 3 days later. They brought advanced equipment and enough nanomedicine to treat everyone who needed it. The Drenthian government praised humanity publicly and signed a mutual defense treaty privately. It was the first crack in the Council's monopoly on galactic politics. On Zenith Prime, the Council was having another emergency session. These sessions were happening almost daily now because the crisis kept getting worse. The Talarian shipping network was operating at 40% capacity. Power stations on 12 worlds had failed because human engineers were not there to maintain the fusion reactors. Communication networks were degrading because human technicians had built systems that nobody else fully understood. The Council's authority was crumbling and everyone could see it. Speaker Vorth tried to maintain control, but he was fighting a losing battle. We must present a united front. The humans are trying to divide us. If we stay strong, they will have no choice but to return to the Council. Ambassador Vex had heard enough. He stood up and addressed the chamber. I am tired of pretending this is about unity. This is about pride. Ancient species like the Quellans and the Paxians refused to admit that they were wrong about humanity. You treated them like children, and now you are surprised they left. You ignored their legitimate grievances, and now you are shocked they are not coming back. Well, let me tell you something. My people are suffering. Our shipping network is collapsing. Our economy is in freefall. And I am not going to let my entire species go bankrupt because you are too proud to admit you made a mistake. The chamber erupted in arguments. Some species agreed with Vex. Others called him a traitor. Vorth tried to call for order, but nobody was listening anymore. The council that had governed the galaxy for 5,000 years was tearing itself apart. The meeting ended with nothing accomplished except more anger and division. Vex left the chamber and went directly to the communications center. He sent a message to the Human Diplomatic Service requesting a formal meeting to discuss trade relations. He was not the only one. By the end of the day, 23 species had sent similar messages. President Walsh met with each delegation personally. The meetings were held on Unity Station, which was a new facility that humans had built in neutral space. The station was smaller than Zenith Prime, but more advanced in every way. It had artificial gravity that did not make people sick, life support that could accommodate any known biology, and defensive systems that made it practically invincible. The aliens who visited were impressed despite themselves. This was what humans could build when they were not restricted by council regulations. The Talarian delegation was first. Ambassador Vex sat across from President Walsh with his trade minister and economic advisor. Walsh was direct. You want access to human shipping technology and logistics networks? Vex nodded. Our economy cannot function without it. We are losing billions of credits every day. Walsh leaned back in his chair. Here are my terms. Full trade partnership with no tariffs or restrictions. Mutual defense treaty. recognition that human space is sovereign territory not subject to council jurisdiction, and you will vote to dissolve the council security force restrictions that prevent members from defending themselves. Vex considered the terms. The last one will be difficult. Many species still support those restrictions. Walsh smiled. Then those species can continue struggling while you prosper. I am not interested in reforming the council.
I am interested in partnerships with species who share our values.
Equality, mutual benefit, and the right to defend yourself. If the Talarians want to keep clinging to an outdated system, that is your choice. But you came to us, remember? The Talarian delegation agreed to the terms after 3 hours of negotiation. They became the first species to formally ally with humanity outside the council framework. The Merithian Collective was next. They brought gifts and formal apologies for their previous votes against human interests. President Walsh accepted the apologies but made it clear that words were not enough. We need to see action. The Merithians agreed to share intelligence about Vrexian military movements and provide basing rights for human ships in their territory. In exchange, they got access to human medical technology and agricultural systems. More species followed. Some came because their economies were collapsing. Some came because they feared being left behind. Some came because they genuinely believed the council was broken and wanted something better. President Walsh met with all of them, and his terms were always the same. Partnership, not hierarchy. Equality, not tradition. Mutual benefit, not exploitation. Species that agreed to those principles were welcomed. Species that tried to negotiate for special treatment or maintain council privileges were politely shown the door. Within 2 months, the Coalition of Independent Systems was formed. 23 species had joined, including some that had been council members for thousands of years. They signed a charter that guaranteed equal representation regardless of how old a species was or how large their territory. Decisions were made by majority vote, not by the decree of ancient species who thought they knew better. Military forces were coordinated, but each species maintained sovereignty over their own ships and soldiers. It was everything the council could have been if it had not been built on a foundation of arrogance and inequality. The council watched this happen with growing alarm. Half of their member species were in economic crisis. A quarter of their members had secretly opened communications with humanity. Several outer colonies had declared independence and applied to join the coalition. The old order was dying and nobody knew how to stop it. Speaker Vorth gave speeches about tradition and stability, but everyone could see he was desperate. The Quellans proposed military action to force species to honor their council obligations, but nobody wanted to start a war they would probably lose. The Vrexian Empire was in even worse shape. War leader Krath was on trial for war crimes. The Vrexian government had been forced to accept human demands because they had no choice. Their fleet was in ruins. Their economy was collapsing. Human ships patrolled their borders, making sure they stayed within their territory. Several Vrexian colonies had rebelled and asked for coalition protection. The empire that had terrorized dozens of species for centuries was broken. President Walsh addressed the coalition assembly on Unity Station. The room was filled with ambassadors from 23 species. Some looked like insects, some like fish, some like rocks that had learned to think. But they all shared one thing, which was a willingness to treat each other with respect. Walsh spoke clearly. 6 months ago, humanity left the Galactic Council because we were tired of begging for basic justice. We were tired of following rules that protected the powerful and abandoned the weak. We were tired of being treated as lesser simply because we were young. So we walked away. And in walking away, we discovered something important. We did not need them. They needed us. The assembly listened. Walsh continued. Today we have built something better. The coalition is not perfect, but it is based on principles that matter. Equality, justice, mutual defense.
Any species can join if they accept these principles.
Any species can leave if they choose. We do not rule through fear or tradition. We rule through consent and cooperation. This is what we offered the council 30 years ago. War leader Krath stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the tactical display with satisfaction. 300 Vrexian warships were gathered in formation and ready to jump into human space. His 4 eyes gleamed with anticipation. For years, the council had protected the humans with their stupid rules about proportional response and diplomatic solutions. Now those rules were gone. Now the humans were alone and vulnerable. Now the Vrexian Empire would take what it wanted. His second in command was a veteran officer named Thex who had fought in a dozen campaigns. He looked at the fleet composition and nodded his approval. We have enough firepower to slag every human colony between here and Earth. Once we control their outer worlds, they will have no choice but to surrender. Krath made a hissing sound that meant agreement. The humans are weak. That is why they ran from the council. That is why they have been hiding behind laws and diplomacy, instead of fighting like warriors. We will crush them in a matter of weeks and take their technology for ourselves. The Vrexian fleet jumped into human space near a colony world called New Austin. The planet had a population of 3 million and minimal defenses according to Vrexian intelligence. It would be an easy target and a good message to send. Krath expected to see civilian ships fleeing in panic. Instead, his sensors detected something that made no sense. There were 20 human warships in orbit around New Austin, and they were not running. They were forming a defensive perimeter and powering up weapons. Krath laughed. 20 ships against 300. The humans have gone insane. He ordered his fleet to advance in standard bombardment formation. The Vrexian ships moved forward with their plasma cannons charging. They had used the same tactic successfully for centuries. Overwhelm the enemy with superior numbers and firepower. Break their lines and then destroy them piece by piece. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations. The human ships did not engage in traditional combat. Instead, they released swarms of small objects that Vrexian sensors initially dismissed as debris. By the time Krath realized they were weapons, it was too late. Thousands of autonomous drones spread across the battlefield in patterns that seemed random but were actually controlled by artificial intelligence systems more advanced than anything the Vrexians had ever seen. Each drone was small enough to slip through defensive fire but packed enough antimatter to vaporize a warship. They moved with precision that no living pilot could match because they were coordinated by quantum computers that could calculate 1 million trajectories per second. The Vrexians tried to shoot them down, but for every drone they destroyed, 5 more got through. The first Vrexian cruiser exploded in a blue-white flash that was so bright it overloaded the sensors of nearby ships. Then another exploded, and another. Admiral Susan Blake watched the battle from the bridge of the EDF horizon. She was a calm woman with gray hair and 30 years of military experience. She had planned this battle for months with the help of the best tactical computers humanity could build. Next to her stood Captain Brandon Knight, who commanded the EDF Retribution. He was younger and more excitable. His voice carried a hint of amazement as he reported the results. Their shields cannot adapt fast enough to our drone targeting patterns. The AI is predicting their defensive responses and adjusting attack vectors in real time. They have never fought anything like this before. Admiral Blake kept her expression neutral even though inside she was pleased. She had argued for years that humanity needed to develop weapons that took advantage of their strengths. Humans were not stronger or faster than most alien species, but humans were better at building computers and programming artificial intelligence. When you combined advanced AI with quantum processing and antimatter weapons, you got something that could defeat a fleet 10 times its size. War leader Krath watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart. In 20 minutes, he had lost 50 ships. His weapons officers were screaming that they could not get target locks on the drones. His shield operators were panicking because the human weapons were hitting weak points they did not even know existed. Krath ordered a retreat but discovered another terrifying truth. The human ships had surrounded his fleet using jump drives that moved faster and more accurately than Vrexian technology. Every escape route was blocked. Captain Knight listened to the Vrexian distress calls being broadcast on open channels. Some of them are trying to surrender. Admiral Blake nodded. Accept surrenders from any ship that powers down weapons and drops shields. Destroy any ship that continues to fight. And make sure our combat footage is being broadcast on every frequency the Council monitors. I want everyone to see this. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, 240 Vrexian ships were either destroyed or captured. The remaining 60 limped away so badly damaged they would need months of repairs. The human fleet had suffered 0 losses. Not a single human ship had even taken serious damage. The drones had done all the work while the crewed vessels stayed at safe distances and coordinated the attack. Krath survived because his flagship was one of the ships that surrendered. He sat in his command chair with his head hung low as human Marines boarded and took control. Admiral Blake appeared on his view screen looking completely calm. She spoke through a translator that rendered her words into the Vrexian language. War Leader Krath, you are now a prisoner of the Earth Defense Fleet. Your surviving ships will be escorted to a neutral location where your crews will be processed. You personally will stand trial for the murder of human civilians on 5 colony worlds. Krath found his voice. The Council will never allow this. You cannot attack a member species. Admiral Blake smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. We are not a member species anymore. We left, remember? And right now I do not think the Council is in any position to stop us from doing anything. She switched to a general broadcast that would reach every ship and station in the sector. This message is for the Vrexian Empire. You have 72 hours to withdraw all military forces from human territory. You will pay reparations to the families of every human you killed. You will hand over everyone involved in the colony attacks for trial. If you refuse, we will bring this war to your homeworlds. And as you have just seen, we have the weapons to win. Choose wisely. The recordings of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communication. Within hours, every species in Council space had seen human drones tearing through Vrexian warships like they were made of paper. The footage was analyzed by every military in the galaxy. The conclusions were all the same. Human technology was far more advanced than anyone had realized. The weapons the humans had registered with the Council were nothing compared to what they actually had. Humanity had been holding back for 30 years. On Zenith Prime, the Council met in emergency session for the second time in a week. This time, nobody was arguing about procedure or protocol. Everyone was too scared. Speaker Vorth tried to maintain order, but his voice was shaking. The humans have violated every treaty regarding restricted weapons. They used artificial intelligence in combat, which is banned. They deployed antimatter weapons, which require special authorization. They must be sanctioned immediately. Ambassador Vex stood up, and his voice was tired. Sanctioned with what? They just destroyed the second most powerful military in Council space in 3 hours. The Vrexians had 300 ships. We just watched those ships get turned into scrap metal by 20 human vessels and some drones. And you want to sanction them? The humans are not bound by our laws anymore. They made that very clear when they left. All we can do now is hope they are feeling merciful. A Drenthian representative spoke up nervously. Perhaps we should try to negotiate. Offer them something they want in exchange for rejoining the Council. Beck shook his head. You still do not understand. They do not want to rejoin. They are done with us. The only question now is whether other species will follow their example. Because I guarantee you there are dozens of younger species watching this and thinking the Council is not worth the trouble. He was right. Even as the Council debated, secret communications were being sent from various species to human diplomatic channels. The Talarians formally requested trade negotiations. The Merithian Collective sent an apology for their previous votes and asked to open relations. Even some Paxian colonies that felt abandoned by their own government reached out asking for help. The galaxy was starting to shift, and the old Council that had ruled for 5,000 years was losing control. President Walsh received reports of all these diplomatic overtures. General Cole was pleased with the military results. We did not lose a single ship. The new weapon systems performed even better than projected. The Vrexians are completely broken. Secretary Palmer looked at the intelligence reports. 15 species have contacted us asking for meetings. Another 20 are probably going to follow. What do we tell them? Walsh thought about it carefully. We tell them the truth. We are happy to work with anyone who treats us as equals. We will defend our friends and we will destroy our enemies. But we will never again join a system that values ancient tradition over basic justice. Humanity tried playing by the Council's rules, and all it got us was dead colonists and empty promises. The first species to notice were the Talarians because they ran most of the major shipping companies in Council space. Their logistics manager was a professional named Vex, who prided himself on running the most efficient supply network in 3 sectors. He noticed when 17 human cargo ships that were supposed to deliver medical supplies to 4 different planets simply disappeared from his tracking system. At first he thought it was a computer error. Then he started getting messages from angry customers asking where their shipments were. He tried to contact the human shipping coordinator, but got nothing except an automated message saying the account had been closed. Vex pulled up a galaxy-wide map of all ships registered to human companies. 2 days ago, there had been hundreds of green dots scattered across Council space. Now there were none. Every single human ship had vanished. He immediately called an emergency meeting with the Council Trade Authority. Nobody there knew what was happening either. The human trade representative who usually attended these meetings had sent a resignation letter and left the station. Her office was empty and her files were deleted. On the mining colony of Kepler 7, the situation was getting desperate. The colony existed for one purpose, which was to extract rare lithium isotopes from the asteroid field. The extraction process was complicated and dangerous, and required constant maintenance of the drilling equipment. For 5 years, that maintenance had been handled by a human engineering team led by Kyle Turner. The team was so good at their job that the Paxian owners of the colony had stopped training their own people in advanced repairs. Why bother when the humans could fix anything in half the time? Kyle had received the withdrawal order while he was elbow-deep in a malfunctioning drill core. He pulled himself out, wiped his hands, and told his team to pack up. The Paxian overseer, whose name was Rel, came running into the equipment bay looking panicked. "You cannot leave now. The primary extractor is making a noise that means it will fail within a week. If it fails, the whole operation shuts down." Kyle looked at him without any emotion. "Should have thought about that before your council representative voted to let my people die. We are leaving in 4 hours. Rel tried everything. He offered double pay, triple pay, a permanent contract with unlimited benefits." Kyle just shook his head. "You do not understand. This is not about money. This is about respect. Your government thinks humans are disposable. So let us dispose of ourselves from your problems. Good luck with the extractor." Rel watched in horror as the entire human team boarded their transport ship and left. 3 days later, the extractor failed exactly like Kyle said it would. The colony had to shut down. 5,000 Paxian workers lost their jobs. The owners lost billions of credits, all because they had never bothered to learn how to maintain their own equipment. The same pattern repeated across hundreds of worlds. Human doctors walked out of hospitals that had relied on their advanced surgical techniques. Human agricultural specialists abandoned farms that had been using human gene-modified crops. Human programmers shut down the artificial intelligence systems they had built to run everything from traffic control to power grids. Everywhere humans had been, they left holes that could not be easily filled. The council convened an emergency session exactly 5 days after the embassy went dark. The chamber was packed with angry representatives demanding to know what the humans were doing and how to stop it. Speaker Vorth called for order, but his voice was drowned out by dozens of species all shouting at once. The Paxians were screaming about economic collapse. The Drenthians were panicking because human doctors had been the only ones who knew how to treat a plague that was spreading through their colonies. The Merithians were complaining that human-maintained communication networks were failing. Ambassador Vex from the Talarian delegation finally got everyone to quiet down by projecting a hologram that showed the economic damage in real numbers. "In 5 days, we have lost 40% of our shipping capacity. Medical supplies are not reaching 30 colonies. Food shipments have been delayed or canceled across 12 sectors. Power failures are being reported on stations that humans built and maintained. The financial impact is already in the trillions, and it is getting worse every hour. We need to bring the humans back immediately." One of the younger council members asked the obvious question. "How do we do that?" Vex looked tired. "We could offer them incentives. Better trade terms, representation on the Security Council, formal apologies." Vorth made a clicking sound that meant he was annoyed. "We will not beg them to return. They are the ones who broke protocol by leaving without proper notice. We should sanction them." That was when Vex did something that shocked everyone in the chamber. He laughed. It was not a polite laugh or a diplomatic laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just heard the stupidest thing imaginable. "Sanction them? With what exactly? They are not buying anything from us anymore. They are not selling anything to us anymore. They are not using our stations or our trade routes. They are completely self-sufficient, and we are the ones falling apart. You still do not understand what has happened here. The humans were not dependent on us. We were dependent on them." The chamber went silent. Vorth tried to maintain his authority. "That is ridiculous. Humans are a young species with limited resources." Vex pulled up more data. "Limited resources? Let me tell you what the humans have been doing while we treated them like children. They built fusion reactors that are twice as efficient as ours. They developed medical technology that can cure diseases we consider incurable. They created agricultural systems that can grow food on dead planets. They did all of this, and they shared it with us freely. But they also held things back. The ships they showed us were nothing compared to what they actually built. The weapons they registered with the Council were toys compared to what they actually developed. They have been operating under Council restrictions for 30 years, and now those restrictions are gone." Someone asked what that meant. Vex looked around the chamber. "It means we are about to find out what humans can really do when nobody is holding them back. And based on what I am seeing, I think we should all be very worried. Not because they will attack us, but because they will not need us anymore. And neither will the species who decide to partner with them instead of us. The council session ended without any decisions being made because nobody knew what to do. The old species like the Quellans and the Paxians refused to admit they might have made a mistake. The younger species like the Talarians were already sending secret messages to human space, asking if trade agreements might be possible. The Vrexians were quiet, which was unusual for them. War leader Krath was already planning his next move. Back on Earth, President Walsh watched recordings of the council session with his advisors. General Cole looked satisfied. They are panicking exactly like we predicted. Secretary Palmer asked the important question. What about the Vrexians? The general pulled up intelligence reports. Their fleet is mobilizing. They think we left the council because we are afraid of them. They think this is their chance to finish what they started. President Walsh nodded slowly. Then we need to show them exactly how wrong they are. Send the orders to Admiral Blake. It is time for humanity to stop hiding what we can really do. The Defense Secretary looked concerned. Once we reveal our full capabilities, we cannot put that back in the box. The President stood up. Good. I am tired of keeping our people weak just to make aliens comfortable. Let the galaxy see what humans can do when we stop asking permission. The orders went out through quantum communication channels that the Council did not even know existed. Every human military ship received the same message. The Vrexians are coming. Show them what happens when they mess with Earth. The Council chamber stretched wide and tall like a cathedral built for giants, and in many ways it was exactly that. Ambassador Claire Bennett stood at the center podium with her hands gripping the sides so hard her knuckles had gone white. She had been speaking for 20 minutes now, and not a single one of the alien representatives seemed to care about what she was saying. The holographic displays around her showed images that would make anyone sick to their stomach. Burned cities on human colony worlds, bodies of children pulled from rubble, entire settlements reduced to glass and ash by plasma bombardment. The Vrexians had done this, and everyone in this chamber knew it. Claire took a breath and continued speaking, even though she knew it was pointless. She had given this same speech 3 times before with 3 different sets of evidence, and each time the Council had found some reason to do nothing. The tall, insect-like Quellans clicked their mandibles in what might have been boredom. The floating jellyfish creatures called Merithians pulsed with colors that their translator said meant impatience. The reptilian Paxians weren't even pretending to pay attention anymore. Commander Jake Morrison watched from the observation deck above the main chamber. He wore his Earth Defense Fleet uniform with all his medals and ribbons, but none of that mattered here. The Council didn't respect military service unless you were from one of the old species that had founded this bureaucratic nightmare 5,000 years ago. Next to him stood Captain Linda Hayes, who commanded the EDF Valiant. She was shaking her head slowly as the Council speaker raised one of his forearms. The speaker was named Vorth, and he was a Quellan, which meant he looked like a praying mantis had been crossed with a politician and grown to 8 feet tall. His voice came through the translators as cold and dismissive. The evidence presented by the human delegation has been reviewed. However, the Vrexian government maintains that these attacks were conducted by independent raiders operating without official sanction. Without concrete proof of government involvement, we cannot authorize sanctions or military intervention against a Council member species. This matter is closed. Claire felt something break inside her chest. It wasn't her heart, because her heart had broken the first time the Council had ignored human suffering. It was something else. Something that had been holding her back from saying what she really thought about these creatures who pretended to be civilized. She opened her mouth to speak but caught herself. Getting thrown out of the Council for insulting the speaker wouldn't help anyone. Instead, she simply nodded and gathered her data files. As she walked toward the exit, she passed the Vrexian delegation. War Leader Krath looked at her with his 4 eyes and his lipless mouth pulled back in what his species considered a smile. He knew he had won. He knew the Council would never stop him. That night, Claire sat in her quarters on the embassy station and typed out a message that would change everything. She addressed it directly to President Henry Walsh back on Earth. The message was encrypted with codes that would take a quantum computer 1,000 years to crack. She kept it short because the president was a busy man, and also because there wasn't much left to say. They will never help us. We have shown them massacres and they debate definitions. We have presented proof and they demand more proof. We have begged for justice and they offer us procedures. It is time to stop asking permission from people who see us as children. It is time to leave. President Walsh received the message while sitting in the Situation Room beneath the White House. With him were General Patricia Cole, who commanded all Earth military forces, Secretary of Defense Greg Palmer, and about a dozen other officials whose job was to plan for the worst-case scenarios. They had been planning for this particular scenario for 6 months. The president read Claire's message twice and then looked around the table. Everyone here knew what had to be done. They had all seen the intelligence reports. The council would never stand up to the Rexians, because the Rexians were an old species with a large fleet. Humans were new and therefore expendable in the eyes of the council. That was the ugly truth that nobody wanted to say out loud. General Cole spoke first because she had been pushing for this course of action since the second massacre. We have 347 ships positioned across council space. We have 12,000 personnel on various stations and planets. We have trade agreements with 68 different species and research partnerships with 23 universities. If we pull out, it will cause chaos. The president nodded. That is the point. We tried their way for 30 years. Now we try ours. The orders went out on secure channels to every human ship, every human station, every human facility in council space. The message was simple. Pack up and come home. No exceptions, no delays, no explanations. Human freighters that were in the middle of deliveries simply stopped what they were doing and turned around. Human engineers working on alien stations logged off their systems and headed to the docks. Human scientists in the middle of experiments shut down their equipment and erased their data. Human diplomats walked out of meetings without saying goodbye. Commander Morrison got the order while the Valiant was docked at Zenith Prime for routine maintenance. He immediately contacted all human personnel on the station and told them to be on the ships within 6 hours. Captain Hayes started the undocking procedures even though the station master was screaming at her through the communications channel. They didn't ask for clearance. They didn't file a flight plan. They just left. Ambassador Claire Bennett walked through the human embassy one last time. 3 years of work was being packed into cargo containers by a team of very efficient Marines. Photos came off walls. Files were wiped from computers. Furniture was loaded onto trucks. In the main reception hall, she recorded a message that would play automatically once the embassy was empty. She kept her voice calm and professional even though she wanted to scream. The message was addressed to the council, but really it was addressed to the whole galaxy. For 30 years, humanity has tried to be good citizens of this council. We shared our technology. We helped species in need. We followed your laws even when they didn't make sense. We asked only for the same respect and protection that you give to each other. Instead, you treated us like we were too young to understand how things work. You let our people die while you debated procedure. You valued your comfort over our lives. So we are done. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council. We will no longer seek your approval. We will no longer share our discoveries. We will no longer pretend that this council represents justice or civilization. You taught us an important lesson. Sometimes the only way to be respected is to walk away. Goodbye. The embassy went dark at midnight station time. By morning, every human facility in council space was empty. Every human ship was gone. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant when humans stopped playing nice.